don't understand what's going on with the museum now. The museum is in transition into moving into another home, and what will happen is that what's happened is Brother Amir actually he did that museum was in the heart of Southwest DC, which is the heart of the hood, and it literally uplifted the community, which was evidenced by the young man who was talking about how his life was changed by the program in there. So not only was it a museum, not only it is a collection of artifacts and information about the history of Muslims in America from pre 1700s all the way to today. Not only is it that, but it's also a community stronghold. So it's really a gem in our community. Inshallah, we hope that you'll support it, and we'll get the tech right, inshallah, and hopefully I can play it towards the end after the text better. So to move on to the next, so now to get into our program, inshallah, what we want to do first we want everyone, all the guests who are actually speaking, to speak of your just to start out by introducing yourself. Basically your name, where you grew up, but especially if you grew up before you were Muslim, your name, where you grew up, your age when you converted to Islam, and what was going on in America at the time. And then inshallah from there, we'll actually get into a conversation about the Dar. But we want to start out, and again, this is about perspectives. And the reason why we decided to go the perspectives route is because, everyone has their own perspective on history. And even when you look at how history has been preserved in the past, it's a combined collective of perspectives. And so inshallah, that's where we want to start. So we can start first with Imam Mutawif, and you can say your community where you are, and then you can talk about basically the things, your name, where you grew up, and what was going on in America at the time that you converted. Imam Mutawif.
Yeah, Imam Mutawif Abd Shaheed. I'm born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and I converted to Islam in, I guess you could say 1968, 69. And the reason I use those two dates is because I was making salat and going on Tabligh Jamaat before I had a Shahada. I didn't know there was such thing as a Shahada. And so as time went by, I understood there wasn't a long period of time before the two events took place. But I took actual Shahada in 1969, but I was making salat and reading the Quran and going on Tabligh Jamaat in 68, in the fall of 68, later part of 68. I came from the Black nationalist movement. I was a part of a group called Republic of New Libya. And there was a book that was written about that era. It was in 1968, called Ballots, Bullets, Black Political Power and Urban Guerrilla Warfare, Cleveland, 1968. I was a consultant to that book. That was a period of time that I lived in, and it was a period of time when the Black nationalist movement started to wane, and it was a time when the orthodoxy of Islam began to come of age. And there were a lot of people who started converting to Islam. I was one of them. And I came from a background of Black nationalism, and I didn't have any idea about any kind of spiritual thing that was attached to Islam. I saw Islam as a government that could actually run a government because it had all the rules and regulations. There was no big I's and little U's. There was no privileged class. Black nationalism did not present that. All you got to do is be Black and you could be involved. But that was inadequate. So Islam was adequate to fulfill all of those things, and that was attracted me, to Islam. And there was a masjid that had been here for a number of years. And we wound up taking that masjid over because it was inactive. The group of people there were old. They didn't have any children who were involved in the community. So when we took Shahada, we kind of like more or less took over the masjid. There was no salat established. There was no Juma. The Adhan wasn't being called. People were disrespecting the site. And, you know, that was perfect for us. You know, so we got involved and we basically kind of cleaned up the neighborhood. And, you know, that was, you know, then we got involved in prison rehabilitation and, you know, that kind of thing. That's kind of like I was 25 years old at the time. That's kind of like a thumbnail of it.
Okay, Jazakallah khair for that.
Mhm.
Can we go to Imam Nadeem? Same question, same answer.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I grew up in Chester, Pennsylvania, and as a teenager moved to West Philadelphia. And during that time, I call myself a movement child. I was born in 1955, so I grew up at a time where a lot of the civil rights activities were going on. You know, and then I grew up also with, there was a movement called the Republic of New Africa. I was a teenager involved with that particular group. And the first time I heard Malcolm X speak, it was in a lady, Miss Palm. She was my 8th grade teacher. She came in one day and said, "I'm tired of all this," and used the profanity. And we were like, whoa. And then she put on Malcolm X Ballots and Bullets one day, and the next day she put on Message to the Grassroots. And I tell people all the time I haven't been the same since. And so, you know, we were a part of that particular movement and went through the Black Nationalist movement. And then later on went through the Pan-Africanist movement because during that time, after the post-civil rights era, you had the anti-apartheid movement, and it was really active. And so I became a part of a group called the All African People Revolutionary Party. It was ran by Kwame Ture, who was known as Stokely Carmichael. So I was a part of that. And, you know, so got involved with that. And then what I recognized is that that once we got Africa, then what you know, we talk about the world, or, you know, they talk about basically joining the world. And then when I started looking at Islam was a worldwide type of movement. It's like what Imam Mutawif was saying. We, coming from a movement background, we saw Islam not as a religion, because I grew up in the church, and so I stepped away from that. But I saw Islam as really the evolution of movement, specifically for African American people, although it was for all people. And so I took my Shahada 6 months after I left college on my 23rd birthday in 1978, and I, you know, knew about the Dar brothers. They were all around my neighborhood in West Philadelphia, and they used to try to give me dawah. And I used to tell them I'm not ready yet. And then shortly thereafter, I got out of college, I became a part of I took Shahada at the Darul Islam Mosque, Masjid Al-Shahud in Philadelphia on 52nd Street in 1978.
MashaAllah. Beautiful stories. I would like to know if Brother Bashir is here, because I would like to get him next. If he's, I'm sorry, if Brother Al-Hadi is here, actually. I'm not sure if he is, because there are a number of people here. But if Brother Al-Hadi is here, if he could actually speak, that would be good. If not, we'll actually go to Brother Akil. So I just scanned the room to make sure he, you know, because I know he wasn't feeling well the last time I spoke to him. So I knew there was a chance that he might not come. So I'm going to go ahead to Brother Akil Fahad. And we're actually going down generations here. So we started with 69 and 78 now.
Wow.
We're going to go to Akil and then Masood. So, brother.
Okay, just for perspective, I was born in 69.
Make me feel like an old man.
Alhamdulillah. So my perspective on the Dar is, initially, when I first became a Muslim, when I first took my Shahada, I actually took my Shahada with a group of Sufi brothers, right? In the Tijaniya community in Detroit in 1991, man. But alhamdulillah, but how I learned of the Dar was through the brothers that I initially took Shahada with, right? Some of them had been affiliated with the Dar but moved out away from the Dar. So all I knew initially was the Dar. It was just that. It really wasn't so much of the Dar al-Islam movement, and it was just like the Dar, the brothers from the Dar, right? And as I began to work with Imam Luqman rahimahullah at Masjid al-Haq, then I began to really learn more and more about it and how it evolved, right, to what we have today, to Al-Ummah, right, is our national Jamaat. And so when I came into Islam, I had a Jamaat orientation because I come from a neighborhood, right? And we had a neighborhood orientation, like, you know, some people say clique, crew, but it was always that type of orientation of, okay, it's us against them. I'm just being honest, right? And the them is anybody who's not trying to move in a certain manner. But with Islam, it gave you not just on whose side or whichever, but it gave you principles and goals so that it doesn't dictate the whims of an individual. It gave you a course of how you should behave, how you should interact, right? And then as I began to do more and more research, I found out how the Dar embodied that, right? The brothers who took on that mantle of taking Islam and spreading it into communities, but building territorial-like communities. It wasn't just like this Ifro, you stay in the masjid and it's like, no, you build something and you establish something. And part of that was respect. And that can't be overlooked in this, right? So I know like a lot of people like to, talk about the spirituality of everything. And I get it. I understand that. But one of the things that the Dar al-Islam brothers did was establish respect for Islam. Because sometimes you have to speak in the language of the people, in a language that the people will understand. So you may be very, very articulate, but that doesn't mean that you're going to have a message that's going to reach somebody who's not at that level of articulation. So you have to be able to speak the language that individual understands. And when you're trying to carve out a place for peace and tranquility in a very rough environment, you have to be able to speak the language of the people. And alhamdulillah, the Dar was able to do that. And a lot of the brothers were able to create peaceful spaces out of these places where, where people, the police didn't even want to, be around too late, right? So that was another aspect that I like having that strength, right? Giving it where sisters can wear hijab and not have even the mindset that somebody's going to be ridiculous enough to touch their hijab, where brothers can wear thobes and walk down the block and won't be bothered, right? That was, and that commonality, that sense of community, that to me, what really drew me into the movement and that sense of activism. So that was like my perspective of the Dar and how I viewed it, because actually I myself, I never had bay'ah to the Dar al-Islam movement. It was only afterwards with those brothers who were a part of that movement. In many ways, it's a continuation of it still, but that's who I have my bay'ah to today.
Okay. I'm gonna, mashallah, again, beautiful stories. I want to move to Masood actually, because Masood, you're the only one here who was born into the Dar, correct?
Yeah, I was. So alhamdulillah, again, my name is Masood Abdul Haq. My father is Sulaiman Abdul Haq. And I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. My father was from Indianapolis, but he took his Shahada in New York under Sheikh Khalid Yasin, and he learned about Islam through Sheikh Luqman and the brothers that were up there in the late 60s. And then finally, after he learned enough, they pretty much kicked him out of New York, told him to go back home and establish a community in Indianapolis, which he did, alhamdulillah, in the community. Helped under Sheikh. So alhamdulillah, I came in as a second generation. He was in Fort Worth in the early 80s with Ali Abdullah, another pioneer in the movement, and Sheikh Shamsuddin, who's still working out in Virginia. And alhamdulillah, these brothers they're still alive. Ali Abdullah passed on. But the thing that's fascinating to me in listening to the brothers who have preceded me is that the split that happened within the Dar, the first one at least in I think 1980, is kind of pronounced in my life because I came in more so in the Tabligh side. Like my father was what they would consider to be an old worker in the Tablighi Jamaat, so he'd go out and do his 3 days, his 10 days, his 40 days in Jamaat, and every now and then 4 months. And sometimes he would take myself and my brother along with him. And we got to see the country, we got to see other countries. And, a lot of it was very South Asian centric to me. And it didn't really resonate with me personally. I thought that the culture was very much Pakistani, Afghani kind of culture. And it didn't resonate with me as something that was true and authentic until we moved to Atlanta in the early 90s. And we moved to Imam Jamil Al-Amin's community. And so many of the things that Brother Akil was saying about the community, about establishing something, about growing roots, about protecting, about all those things, those were the ideals that I was able to see in Atlanta. Prior to that, my experience with the Dar in the Tablighi side was more of a nomadic kind of experience where they'd stick and move, and they'd be, going to different cities, different locales, and almost to me, from my vantage point, looked like skirting responsibility in a lot of ways. It's easy to go to a town and give dawah to people you don't know and tell them to come to the masjid for a quick bayan or whatever, and then you're gone, right? You tell them that they should be coming to the masjid, they should be reading more Quran, and then you're gone. And it's a whole nother dynamic when you see somebody who's standing post every single day. You know where he's going to be 5 times a day. And that was very impressive to me when we were able to see Imam Jamil, Imam Nadim, Brother Jamal Abdul Hakim, brothers like Abdul Mutawaf and Sheikh Imam Abdul Mutawaf and Sheikh Luqman up in Detroit during the riyadas when everybody would come together. And you got to see the hierarchy of what it meant to follow, what it meant to lead, what it meant to protect. And that was, a stark contrast between the stick and move kind of thing. So one of the things I was very interested in learning during this event and during this program was trying to kind of understand for the brothers who were around during that split, how it felt and what it was like, when people were essentially choosing between that, South Asian kind of centric nomadic iteration of the Dar and what we had with the National Ummah. So alhamdulillah, thank you. I'm honored for being here on such an esteemed panel, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot tonight.
And before we go on, I want to introduce Brother Sayyid Abdul Hadi because he wasn't here before, and he's the only one we haven't been able to give an introduction to. So inshallah, you're here. Can you speak just to make sure we can hear you, Brother Sayyid? I see you here. Just want to make sure we can hear you before we spotlight you. Brother Sayyid, can you hear us? It doesn't appear as if it doesn't appear as if
he muted?
Say again?
Is he muted?
Brother Sayyid, you may be muted. Let's see if I can, you know what? I don't even see I don't see an audio source for him. Appears as if not audio source. So we'll see while he's getting his audio together, inshallah, what we can do. So the next question, and we want to roll back to Imam Mutawif because Masood talked about the split, but I want to get into actually the things that happened before the split, before we get to the split, right? And so Imam Mutawif, if you could give us a little bit of insight into what was going on and what made you choose, were there other Muslim groups? What made you choose the Dar when you came into Islam? And I heard that you were Imam since 69, but I don't know if that was you converted and then you became Imam immediately, or can you clear that up and then maybe take us back to its inception and then talk a little bit about the atmosphere before the split until the split. If you can do that, Imam Mutawif.
Sure. Inshallah. Actually, we had a group, and we established a group. It was called the Islamic Revivalist Movement Incorporated. That was our tax-exempt entity. And Dr. Ihsan Bagby and Dr. Antar Smith, whose names are Abdul Kabir, and Ihsan Abdul Wajid back then. And there was another brother named Hassan Abd Shahid. This entity was already established. And when I became Muslim, I came in under the basic tenets of the Tablighi Jamaat. That it didn't really last long, but that was my introduction. And in fact, when I found out that I had not converted actually to Islam, I hadn't taken my Shahada, I was on Tablighi Jamaat, and two brothers came to join the Tablighi Jamaat from Cleveland. And brother Yahya Abdul Sabor, rahmatullah, and another brother by the name of Amir Rashid, they came and told me that the sheikh at the masjid, who was the imam and had been the imam for a long time because he broke with First Cleveland Mosque back in 1947 and established Masjid al-Mu'min in 1953. And that was the name of the masjid when we took it over. And we wanted to use their tax exemption and they wouldn't let us do it. So we filed for our own federal tax exemption under the name of Islamic Revivalist Movement, Inc. And thus the name IRM came about. And Dr. Bagby and Dr. Antar, they were the ones that did the paperwork to get that done. And so what happened one morning, somebody came by, we were making Fajr on Maple Street. And that's where we were located when we were there on Tablighi Jamaat. And somebody came by and said there was a place on Sumter Street where the brothers was praying 5 times a day. And, you know, so we went that next Fajr, we went there and I saw these brothers and I saw, oh, no, man. No, this is what it's about right here, because they had on the long coats and the toes and they was, you know, like cut from the same kind of rock I was cut from. I like that. Okay. So I told them, Jamaat, I said, this is where we're going to go. Okay. When I was appointed to be the imam, it was a group of brothers who decided that I should be the imam. I didn't know anything. You know, so there were brothers who came in from Philadelphia, brothers who came there from New York, and they helped us, you know, with Jumas and helped us with the Arabic, and they helped us with Salat and Ramadan. One of the imams of one of the first imams of Masjid Mujahideen, Hassan Abdul Haq, he came there with his son on several occasions and stayed with us, you know, helping us to get, you know, the Islam established the right way. You know, and so consequently, we were the first masjid outside of New York to make the Dar Islam movement a national movement. And then came Philadelphia, then Washington, D.C., then Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, those were the initial masjids that became a part of it. And then in 1970, we took on the mission of spreading the Dar Islam movement message to the South. And there was a recent article dated August the 9th, 1970. It was in a newspaper from Montgomery. This brother Hassan Abd Shahid, he was like my first Amir, but he was on the run from draft evasion. Back then, you could go to jail if you didn't go to the army, if you didn't, you dodged the draft. So he told me he was on the run. I said, "Oh, that's beautiful, man. Okay, okay, come on in." And he became a part of the Jamaat. The FBI broke through the house we were staying in, when our wives were there and we were gone. And they were coming to the mosque, and he told me that he was tired of running and that he wanted to just get this behind him. As a result of that, in his extradition, voluntary extradition to Birmingham, Alabama, he ran into a brother by the name of, his name was Kind J, and he was in Atlanta. Hassan was there with several other brothers who were merchants, and they were there for the first African Congress conference that was held in Atlanta. He met this brother, Kind J, who eventually took the name Rasul, and he had this building. It was an African emporium where he sold African clothes and figures, and it was on Ashby Place, and that was the first masjid. So Hassan asked me to send Isan and Antar down there, and I told him no, that I was coming with another brother by the name of Yasin Asami. So we went down there in October of 1970, and we established that masjid there. There was no masjid there, period, none. No matter what anybody may claim, none. We have documentation, okay? That's the golden rule. Okay, so anyway, what happened after that, Brother Hassan, he established a masjid in Birmingham. He gave Shahada to some other brothers in Tallahassee, and they were Dar Islam masjids. And right now, Brother Akil and I are working on a piece to connect all the dots and the time frames and the people who were involved. So that was the spread of Islam. It wasn't just a New York thing or a Cleveland thing. It was spread by, these different events that took place to establish the Dar Islam movement. Also, what we were able to do, that we had some posters that we put up around the country. And they were in Atlanta, they were in Pittsburgh, they were in Cleveland, they were in Columbus, they were in Cincinnati, they were in other places, they were in New York. Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change the condition that exists within themselves. These were plastered all over parts of the country, especially in African-American neighborhoods. And that became kind of like a motto. And people were thinking that Dar Islam was a different kind of Islam, but it was not. It was the name of the movement. So, I mean, there's a lot of history, and we can't cover probably all of it now, but those are the kind of rudimentary things that got us started. We started the prison program. We're the first Islamic organization in the country, and if somebody can prove different, I'm okay with that. We have documentation to have the prison program. We were signed a contract with the state of Ohio to provide religious services to the Muslims in the prison, and wound up going to federal court suing the state of Ohio and the prison system so that the brothers could get Qurans and wear dhikr beads, beards, and have kufis. And we all that's documented, so that's, it's not rumor, this is documents, and Brother Akil can attest to it. So that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg on that.
And I know it's the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to have to do a series, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about just the story of tracking everyone down. Every time I track somebody down, they recommended 5 more people who were establishing things in different places. And it was, the story of tracking every people down was just as amazing as anything, because everyone told us about how somebody established something in this place and that place and that place. And right. You're talking about establishing, what people call Orthodox Sunni Islam at a time when people said that Orthodox Sunni Islam was not established. So, right. Nadeem, can you talk a little bit about, can you bring us forward, right? And talk a little bit about, from where Brother Imam Mutawaf left off, kind of into the split, but talk a little bit about what you all established before the split, and while, for example, the Nation of Islam. Talk about the context where y'all were when the Nation of Islam was budding, where you all were when the Nation of Islam transitioned, and how did those timelines coincide?
Alhamdulillah. First of all, with the Nation of Islam, I had sisters who were a part of the Nation of Islam. And like I said, I was born in Chester in my early teenage years in Chester, and they used to come get us off the corners. And they call it fishing. And they would, I would hear, go to the temple and listen and listen and listen. And what I heard, it was about the do for self. I loved all that. But then when they started talking about the white man was the devil, and at that time I had, I think in 6th grade, they put me in a school that was basically integrated. And so I developed friendships with white people. And so when they start, and a couple of years later, when I'm hearing that the white man was the devil, I'm saying, well, Greg is not a devil and Sammy's not a devil, but I know some black devils also, and so, so it didn't fly with me. The theology did not fly with me. So I never became a part of the Nation of Islam. They used to try to get us to join. And so then that's when I really gravitate more towards nationalism and then Pan-Africanism. And I was smiling because Imam Mutawaf mentioned about the posters. I'm a product of one of those posters because I used to be waiting at the bus on 52nd Street in Philly, and I would read the sign. They would say things like Adam, Noah, Ibrahim, alayhi salam, and all the prophets were Muslim. Why aren't you? And that was a very popular. And they were designed like the concert posters. So what I loved about the Dar is that they presented a culturally specific approach to Islam. They did not present something that was foreign to us. So for my eyes at that time, that made sense to me. And then eventually, I came to Islam, and then, I spent a year as a Muslim in Philadelphia, and then I heard about Imam Jamil had become Muslim and established a community there. And so I came there for a week. And the very first day, I saw the brothers and sisters living around the masjid, and the adhan being called, and I'm like, and I called she's my wife now, but I called my fiance, and my mother said I'm not coming back the very first day, and so because I appreciated the effort that was being made, the establishment of a community, and so for a year or two, we, again, we were more independent for that first year when I came down here, and then Imam Jamil and our community, we became a part of the Dar. At that time, I took my Shahada at the Dar, in the Dar Masjid in Philadelphia. But then when the Imam was more of an independent at that time, at the Masjid at 547. And so then in negotiations, and then they took bayat to Yahya Abdul Karim, Sheikh Yahya Abdul Karim. And then so we became part of the Dar at that time, and then later on, there was a split that came about. We heard about that the Dar had established or declared war on Russia, and so this was around the time that the United States or Russia invaded Afghanistan the first time, and we had heard word about that, and so we basically sent word that we needed to talk, and so Sheikh Yahya came down, and come to find out that he had joined up with a man named Jelani, Sheikh Jelani, and that was a group. And so then they were trying to convince us to be a part of that. And so I remember Imam Jamil wanted to meet him, and so when he went up to, I think, Washington, and he met him, and so it was more of a tariqah, and I remember him saying, he came back and said, I met him, I wasn't impressed. Y'all can go with him, but I'm not going to follow this man. And so at that point, several other communities created basically stepped away from what was then the Darul Islam movement, and formed and met. And Imam Mutawaf can probably give you more information on that. Met, I believe it was in Cleveland, and established the national community. and under the leadership of Imam Jamil. And then that's probably was about 1980, 82, I believe. If Imam Mutawaf, you can maybe fill in the blanks.
Yeah. And I want to well go ahead, actually fill in the actually, you know what, before we do that, I actually want to jump to, there was a question, I think it's a question that Musa asked before we jump into kind of filling the blanks with the split, and then I'm gonna let Masood kind of also ask some questions about that, and then hopefully we can get Brother Sayyid Abdul Hadi, because I see him trying to come in. Wa alaikum salam.
Okay.
Yeah, so we hear you, but I think we can't see you now.
Well, let me see if I can click on this here.
Okay.
So just move your camera. Move your camera down.
Yeah, your camera, it seems like it's like yeah.
Towards the ceiling.
Like side.
We can see your hand.
Yeah, I don't know if you need to flip the camera to the other way. It might be that it's flipped the wrong way.
I should be able to see myself, right?
Say again?
I should be able to see myself.
Yeah, you should be able to see yourself.
I think we should leave well enough alone to see we can hear him. That's good enough.
Yeah. we'll let you speak. And I have to do a precursor with this one because I lost my audio.
Well, you know what? There you go.
There you go.
All right.
In the house.
I'm here. Allahu Akbar.
Yeah. I'm going to do a little bit of, can everybody hear me clearly? Now
kind of breaking up for me.
So, okay, it seems like it's getting better again. Okay, yeah, so as I was, to intro, Brother Abdul Hadi, he was gracious enough to actually let me come and interview him in his home. And so we did an hour and a half talking about the Dar in Philly. And it was a fascinating conversation, you know, and he's a very humble man who doesn't like to give himself a lot of credit, but you know, he's obviously one of the founders of the first Dar Masjid in Philadelphia. So Brother said, to get you up to speed, everyone, I would love you to do the same thing. Everyone introduced themselves and talked about what was going on in America at the time that they became Muslim and why the Dar was attracted to them. Would love for you to do the same thing.
All right, Assalamu alaikum. I'm kind of breaking up, I think. Am I right?
You all right?
Yeah, you.
Yep, you're good.
All right. Well, as I said earlier, that for me, Dar Islam was home because of the fact that I came into Islam through the first person that was the Imam of what became Dar Islam, which is Rajab Mahmoud. My brother lived in New York. I had just got out of the military, and through my conversation with my brother, who was 10 years my senior, he convinced me to become Muslim. And I went to New York and took my Shahada from Rajab Mahmoud, inshallah. And from then, I consider myself a part of Dar Islam. Dar Islam came to Philadelphia, I think it was about 68, after the police had raided the mosque in New York. And they came to Philadelphia seeking support from the various local communities. And some of the brothers here in Philadelphia, accepted the call, although the leadership rejected the call. And we established, by we, I mean such people as Ali Ahmed, Abdul Karim Ahmed, Brother Jamil Abdullah. We established the first Dar Islam Masjid in Philadelphia. I think it was about June, it was the summertime of '69 up on Ogans Avenue. And that was the first Dar Islam in Philadelphia. Then we moved down to 19th to Columbia, and because I had been, Muslim the longest of the crew, with the exception of Abdul Karim, because I became Muslim in 66, 67, and they were just becoming Muslim. But we struggled together, And in 1971, I believe, we had the first national Dar es Salaam Merit or Wazirat conference up in New York at Yabsy Mosque. And that's where we solidified the fact that we were a part of Dar es Salaam. And at that time, it was about 200 of us up there, I'm pretty sure, you know what I mean? But by that time, it had gone from Philadelphia, I think it was in Springfield, I think it was in Ohio, I think it was in North Carolina, you know. But anyway, that was my spill to come into Dar es Salaam, you know, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm still Dar es Salaam. I have a plaque right now that I keep on my person that says Dar es Salaam movement, you know. And, when the split came, a couple of splits came. One came in 1974 when the then Imam decided to have a business venture with the community that was not tied to Dar es Salaam. And when I questioned it, I was told, quite frankly, listen, we the masjid and that's that, and you ain't down, you ain't got to be. So I said, okay, I'm not. I'm Dar es Salaam. And I split. But about 2 or 3 days later, 4 or 5 brothers came right to me and said, you know, you were right, man, because we do have commitments with Dar es Salaam. So we opened up another mosque in West Philadelphia. And then that was 1974. Then in 1981 or something like that, 79, 80, somewhere in that line, when Sheikh Jelani came to town, and he came in and he said such things as, there's nobody in the world doing Islam like you people, and Allah has sent me directly to you, and things of that nature. Whoever it was, Yahya Abdul Kareem, the Imam director of Dar es Salaam, wound up saying that there was no more Dar es Salaam, and that he had turned the movement to the hands of Mubarak Ali Jelani, and it was now the international, part of the international Jamaat al-Fuqh. And at that juncture, some of us that were not privy to the information that was given to us concerning the Tariqah, some of us, we decided that no, you know, one of the things about movement was not to have a foreigner be our leader, you know what I mean? Which is what the Stark-Heart mark about Dar es Salaam was. It was a homegrown movement, you know? So some of us left and others became a part of what was started as International Jamaat al-Fuqra, which later became Muslims of the America, you know, which now in the year 2021, there are plenty who have wound up saying that the move at that time was the wrong move, but Allah is in control of all affairs. So alhamdulillah, but out of me. But relative to Atlanta, Georgia, it was because of that move that we elected Imam Jamil to keep the idea of movement going. Matter of fact, they said we couldn't use Dar es Salaam, so we first came up with Jamaat Rasul, and then we changed it to the National Imam Jamil, you know, so alhamdulillah, that's a skill on Dar es Salaam. I will say this, when they said there was no more Dar es Salaam in Philadelphia, I went to the mosque, I said, listen, everything in this building that got Dar es Salaam's name on it, I'm taking. And I still have some of the records right now today, you know, from the shahadas that was given to everything else that was taking place with Dar es Salaam. Because like I said, I am Dar es Salaam, mashallah.
MashaAllah, that's amazing testimony, subhanAllah. So one more before we get to Masood, and that is the structure part, because we want to know a bit about the structure before it split, because there were some very extraordinary things that were accomplished, such as schools and the printing presses and things like that, of that nature. Things that, metrics that normally America would view as something to actually chronicle and make national. But for some reason, in this case, it wasn't done. So and I don't know who to give this question to, but can someone talk about the structure and the things that were built before the split, that were in many, many states, even across, actually across the country in Canada and other places? Who wants to volunteer to talk about that?
Well, Imam Mutawaf, inshallah, if you don't mind, Imam. If you don't mind, Imam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
By the way, excuse me, before we start, is it clear to you? Is the audio clear to you all?
Assalamu alaikum.
Say again.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
You're
This is
breaking up.
I don't want to cut. I came in a little late, but this is, I know Imam Mutawaf and Sheikh Hadi over there, Musa Abdul Malik from the Dar es-Salaam movement. I was one of the first when we first elected Imam Yahya to the imamship of the Dar back in 1968, at 240 Sumter Street. It was maybe about 30 of us on the rooftop, and we elected him to be the Imam of the Dar es-Salaam movement. Now, getting back to the 1965, where Sheikh Hadi was saying, you know, the brothers of that era was going down to a place called State Street, with Sheikh Dawood. May Allah be pleased with him. And the brothers was going down there for classes. So this is extraordinary because, you know, when you think of it, you know, when they was going down to the classes at Sheikh Dawood Mosque, who Sheikh was one of the founding, one of the great respected sheikhs that we know in Islam and in New York. So when the brothers from the Dar es-Salaam in 1965 from Brownsville, because that's where they was at, that's where they started at. Imam Yahya, what's the Imam name? Hadi?
Isa?
The Imam back then.
Oh, the Imams, Vijay Mahmood.
Vijay Mahmood and Abdullah.
By the way, if you can
so
show
when they
your
was going
face,
down
it would
to-
show on the, because we can't see you right now, and we can't see you on like Facebook where everybody is. So if you could show, it would be good, because then it'll show in the broadcast, because people can only hear you at this point. But it's up to you.
I'm all right, I'm cool, you know, I'm all right. They don't have to see me. This is history class on the dog, you know. But anyway, listen, they went down, they were taking classes at State Street, all the brothers that was down with the Dar es-Salaam movement. Matter of fact, they wasn't even the Dar es-Salaam movement at that time. They was just a Jamaat of brothers. So when they was down there, when they went down to State Street for classes with Sheikh Dawood and Hafiz Makbul, you know, they found that they felt a little uneasy. So whatever popped up at that particular time in their mind was the Dar es-Salaam. We need to create a Dar es-Salaam movement. So from there, it took off for a little while. And then they went into a scully where brothers went off and certain things, even back then. Even back then, the brothers went off. And then maybe about 1965, 67, 68, we elected Imam Yahya to the imamship, you know, to the Dar es-Salaam movement. And from there, it took off. I remember when Imam Mutawaf came to 240 Sumter Street in 1968 and got down with the movement. Right, bro?
That's right.
You know, they got down with the movement, but the movement spread fast. You understand? The brothers fell in love with the Dar es-Salaam movement. We were second to none. We were parachuting out of airplanes. Believe me. We had an army called Rod. You understand? And we, you know, we parachuting out of airplanes and things like that. But one thing we said, we don't establish Islam in this country or they don't have to kill us one way or the other. That was our motto. You understand? You don't want us to practice, well, ship us out of the country. You know, so, you know, it was a great ordeal when the dog came and spread it all through the Caribbean. all through that. And then they threw the, Saudi Arabia, they threw the monkey wrench in there on us.
No.
And broke the movement up. And it was by design. A lot of things happened in between that. But we were second to none. Our schools, the school system, we had school, when our kids went to school, our kids were second to none in reading, math, all of that. When we went up against, the non-Muslim kids in the school, the Muslim kids were second to none. Second to none in all them categories. Reading, math, geometry, science, so we taught them well, man. And we established a will-based community. You understand? That spread all the way across this country.
It's 8 o'clock.
27 cities under one imam. Something that never have happened after that.
Is this Musa Khan, by the way?
Excuse me?
Is this Musa Khan, Big Musa?
This Musa Malik.
Oh, Musa Malik, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, I remember you, Malik. I remember you.
Well, I remember you too. I came in the dean when I came in the dean at 19. I'm 71.
Yeah. Well,
I came to the doll. I'm a doll baby. I came to the doll. You understand? 1967.
Yeah. Excuse me, but to get to what you asked, Khalil, about structure, one of the things was Imam Yahya had put together, it was like a bayat, where the imams pledged themselves to be under the one imamship of Imam Yahya Abdul Karim, right? But it was based on the Medina Treaty that the Prophet Muhammad made at the Treaty Hudaybiyah. It was based on that. As a matter of fact, I still have the treaty itself, and it's actually almost exact same words, so far as not taking your enemies for your friends and not befriending one another and always being a brotherhood and always helping one another and all of that, So that was one of the solidifying things for the leadership. It said at the top, this is a writing with Imam Yahya Abdul Karim and Imam so-and-so of such and such community in such and such a place, to wit, and then it went on and read about the Medina Treaty, what we did, and then it was signed. It was signed. That was another thing that I think made it very, very prevalent, because the people put their signatures on the paper by Allah's permission, And I think that the only thing that really jammed, I think, this is my personal view, I think it really jammed was personality. I think personality was the point that Shaitan used to put a wedge in there, because Imam Yahya had already had a sheikh. He was already under the tutelage of Sheikh Mahmoud, He was already down like that. And he had begun teaching what we just called it the Thursday night class, where he was assimilating some of the information, which I came to learn later on, He was assimilating information that was given to him. And the idea was supposedly that we could at one point become a part of the Sufi order of Abdul Qadir Jilani. And we would be part of the Qadiri order of Sufis. But it didn't get that far. But I think that personality is what Shaitan used to wedge that, because when Sheikh Jilani came, only a few had any idea of what he was talking about. The ones that really got down with following him was the ones that had recently come into Dar Islam, say like about 78, 79, like that. They're recently coming to the movement, you know what I mean? But the seasoned brothers, a lot of the seasoned brothers was like, hey, come on. We know a little better. We'd seen things happen. Rabbitat tried to make a move on the movement in 1972. Tried to make a move on the movement. So listen, we will give you everything you need. All you got to do is follow our shakes. That's all you got to do.
Well, but listen. We were so dynamic. Many people don't know this, but we were so dynamic where people they say, where these cats jumped up, where this came from? That the Sheikh of Saudi, the Prince Faisal's son came to the little raggedy mosque we had on on 52 Herkimer Street. You understand? To see what we was about. You understand? But what we was talking about with Jelani and them, there was those that split and went with Jelani, and there was a section of us that didn't. So we didn't go with him. We didn't go with him, man. We didn't follow that. And to this day, you understand, we reject all of that and have passed by there, But he came with a smooth, talk. And he took the brothers that, one thing for sure, when he came and the split came, the Hard Rock brothers that was in Rod and all of that, they went over to him. And the other brothers that was kind of lenient, they didn't have no, nothing. They just pushed him out the way. You know what I'm saying? But when the army went over to him, that was it. When Rod went over to him, that was it. It was over.
Masood.
It was over.
Yes, sir.
And we reject it to this day. And, we believe that, they put them on us.
SubhanAllah.
They put them on us.
SubhanAllah. I didn't know. I know also the curator, Brother Amir, did have his hand raised. I didn't know if he had questions. I always respect his questions. For those who weren't here before, and didn't get the sound, also, the one who actually has helped facilitate all this and why this is all here is because Brother Amir Muhammad has literally dedicated most of his life to preserving Muslim American history everywhere. And he's the one who actually asked for this to happen. And then alhamdulillah, that responsibility I was grateful for, so try to take it from there. Masood, I know you had, so Brother Amir, I didn't know if you wanted, anytime you want to jump in. I see you sitting here observing.
Good and chilling, man. Alhamdulillah, my brothers. Musa, Brother Mount brother out of Cleveland, man, thank y'all for your story. Y'all don't know how important it is. And hearing your story, I hope that they hear, they say this is African American History Month. I hope they hear that y'all held to your understanding. Allah sends everybody, they don't like the word messenger, so a mailman. And I'm glad y'all recognize that Allah has we as an African American community has our own voice, that Allah has a relationship. I appreciate that. I did have questions, but they answered each one of them. To be continued. Alhamdulillah.
So Masood, I know you had prepared some questions because, and for those who weren't here, Masood is the one. Masood and Brother Musa, I don't know if he's going to show his face, but I know he also grew up, was born into the Dar. So we want to definitely get their questions and their comments because everyone has a different perspective. And before we do that, just to let you know, we did go on a treasure hunt for sisters, but it was really, really hard. So I think we're going to do another program called Sisters of the Dar. Because, like Aisha, and I always think about the Sunnah, Aisha preserved the Prophet Muhammad's Sunnah like nobody else. She was a historian and a scholar, one of the greatest scholars. And so we have to make sure that we continue that tradition. So inshallah, we're still on the hunt. But Masood and Musa, talk to the brothers. I'm gonna let y'all have it from here. I'm gonna be quiet.
Just like back in I heard the brother was talking about, I think Imam Mutawaf was talking about the brother that was they were looking for him for draft dodge, and we had the same thing, man, where they raided the mosque, all kinds of stuff, man. We was in the battle of our lives.
Yeah, so along those lines, with the draft dodge, and my father had a similar story where he told me that he had to dodge the draft as well. So he went into the draft meeting that he had, and he said that he acted crazy. He had a dashiki on. He said he was ready to go kill Whitey and do all this kind of stuff so that they didn't take him over to Nam. We had Imam Mutawaf tell us that he was into Black nationalism and
Imam Mutawaf,
anti-government. And then we had Nadim tell us that he was a movement child. So what the theme that I saw there was that, all of the brothers who are directly above, my generation, coming into this group, everybody who was in it was a rebel, you know. And then you talked about Imam Mutawaf, you talked about the prison outreach and the brothers who you brought from those you know, factions of society. And obviously those people are rebels and people who color outside the lines a little bit. So I'm always curious if my perspective is skewed, because everybody who I looked up to, everybody who I was around, everybody who I was around growing up, all of my uncles, my you know, the brothers who we looked up to were rebels. Now, I don't know if that's just something that you had to be a rebel in order to drop the religion and all the teachings that your mother and father gave you, or if that was just the natural state of things in the 60s and 70s, where most people were rebellious in that nature. So I thought I'd get some perspective on that. Were you guys just was it that the rebels gravitated to Islam, or was everybody just kind of rebellious, quote unquote rebellious during that time? And you know, you guys are just an extension of that.
Well, out of that, in the 60s, what happened is that the whole country, white people, black people, were all in rebellion against the system itself. That's when they started burning the draft. The white people were burning the draft cards, and they weren't in agreement the way things were going, black and white. So it was real easy for people who had rejected the system to find a system that would be compatible with what they rejected. So consequently, Islam presented that alternative for many people. It presented an alternative. One time there was a friend of mine, he asked me, he's a white guy, he asked me, what made you become Muslim? I said, Christianity. He said, what do you mean? I said, there's no way in the world, how, logically, anybody wants to do it, fine. It's not a criticism, it's an observation. Anybody who would follow a guy into the church who just got finished hanging somebody in my family, and then he's going to go, I'm going to go to the church where he's going, that don't even make sense. Okay, so it's a whole bunch of stuff like that. The God that you worship, he don't ever answer my prayer, he only answers yours. Okay, so I had to figure out what I was going to do outside of that. So when Islam came along, he told me, no, that's not true what they're doing, but this is the truth, and you know, get with it. And it was work. You just didn't fall into it. You had to work. You had to work your way into the Iman. You had to pray 5 times a day. Your legs and knees and feet were not used to those genuflections. They were not used to being able to bend like that. You were not used to standing up in prayer like that, going down on your face. Everything was new. You had to learn how to go to the bathroom. You had to learn how to have relationships with your wife. You had to realize there were limits to your desires. Every single thing that you had learned, which was savagery, had to be turned around, and it took work to do that. You know, so consequently, when we started working in the prisons, we were dealing with people who were the victims of the same society that we were victims of. They got incarcerated. We found out when we did our statistical work on the people who were in prisons, they were basically in there for economic crimes, you know, selling drugs, armed robbery, bank robbery. They were in there for economic crimes, you know, and if they had access to capital, half of the people who are in there wouldn't be in there. You had some murder people in too, but usually they never went back to prison after they got out. So we did a lot of extensive research on why these people were in prison. And we had to tell some of these preachers that were telling us, the Muslims this, and I said, well, you got to remember, they was Christians that brought them to prison and Muslims who got them out. Okay, so you have to observe all of those kinds of things when you start trying to criticize something that you don't know anything about. I've been a Christian, you've never been a Muslim. So you can't tell me anything about Islam, but I can tell you everything about Christianity. You know, these were the kind of arguments, you know, and discussions that we used to have, you know, in our strive to make Islam something that was realistic, you know, to people's everyday life. Okay. You know, that's just, I mean, to the moderator's point earlier, there is so much that has to be discovered because you had different levels of conversation and different levels of penetration in terms of leadership. Okay, you had brothers who were like rank and file brothers. They didn't have the information that the leadership had. Okay, so there were things that were decided in the leadership meetings amongst the imams that the rank and file people didn't know. It's not nothing wrong with that, but they just didn't know it. So you have to approach this from a multi-perspective situation. You had people who were in leadership, then you had people who were not. You had people who were emirs and people who were not. You had the rank, and everybody has their perspective from where they saw things. You know, and I think that when you start dealing with that, that's the only way that you're going to get a complete perspective of the entire movement, is dealing with the people A, B, C, and D. Just an opinion.
I concur, Imam, because like I was saying, one of the things concerning to South was the fact that there were only a few people in the community that were privy to the information that Sheikh Yahya was giving out on Thursday night classes, you know?
Right.
But that was because you had to go through what was called Minhaj classes. And that is to say that there was a number of classes from Mubadi Islam, which we came to find out is what is now called elementary teachers of Islam, that the Salaf love to espouse, you know what I mean? But from Mubadi class all the way up to Taqdir and Qadr. And the structure of the class was such that you had to at least go through what was called the Marifatullah class, which was at least, considering it was only an hour a week, most of the time on Sundays or maybe Tuesdays, considering it's an hour a week, you know, which is almost a whole year, you know. They had to at least go through that before you got invited to the Thursday night class. So a lot of the people didn't go through the whole set of Minhaj classes to get invited to the Sheikh's class. Excuse me. And I think, as I was saying, I think that was one of the things, personality wound up being used by Shaitan, you know what I mean? Like creating what was thought to be an elitist thing, you know what I mean? You know, when they saw the Imam, Imam had 4 or 5 guys around him, and he's some kind of big shot and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, you know, we lost some brothers. What year was that when we lost some brothers in
74?
74?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, I think that, like I said, personality they deal with, and as Imam is saying, yes, there were those who were privy, and there were those who were not privy. And then there were those who were just coming along in the late 70s that was just coming to movement. Some of them were coming out of the nation thing, because when Elijah Muhammad died in 76, it became very clear what the deal was, you know. So some were just coming into Islam orthodoxy from that point, using things from their viewpoint, you know. And they always had to have a leader, you know. I mean, they always had to have a rescue force. You understand?
Right.
So, you know, but Allah's in control of all affairs. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, here we are. And I can say this unequivocally. When I came into Islam, there were 2 mosques. Actually, there were 3. There were 3 mosques in this city, and none of them was open 24 hours a day. When Dar Islam came on the set, it opened its doors 24 hours a day. And we have come full circle to now where there's over 65 mosques in Philadelphia. 65 mosques in Philadelphia, maybe more. And none are open like the Dar was. You know what I mean? The Dar was open because the idea was to establish Islam in the land. It was not that we were anti-America or anti-Democrat or anti-police. We were pro-Islam. We were pro-Islam. And all we had was the book and the Sunnah. Matter of fact, I think we only had the Manual of Hadith by Muhammad Ali, or maybe
Miskat.
Hadith. And we may have had James
and
Robeson.
Now Duty.
James Robeson.
Yeah, my
and, you know,
And Now
that's all
Duty.
we had. But we did have what we thought to be, by Allah's permission, faith in Allah. And we rolled like that. Bismillah. Our adage was, if you can't Bismillah, you can't do it. You know?
Assalamu alaikum.
Right.
Islam.
So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You know, one of the, all of that was good that we did, you know, but the thing that strengthened the dog, man, and to bring the, you know, that brought the ranks tight, man, we broke bread often.
I mean,
We sat in the circle. Circle was one of our strongest assets when we got in circle with the brothers, man, and we looked in each other's eyes, cold nights, 1967, 68, and said what we want to do. You understand? We want to establish the deen in the country. So that there we went forth with, and you know, you had to have, you know, we the brotherhood. We loved the brotherhood, man. You didn't get to the brotherhood, your heart hurt at the time. You know, if a brother was missing out of the circle for 2 days, and he didn't show up, we'll knock on his door, Fajr time. He
Right.
might tell his wife, baby. He might tell his wife, baby, go see who's knocking at the door. She'll go look at the peek hole. She see 25 brothers standing out there.
Mm.
She go back to the room. She said, Habibi. She said, there's 25 brothers out there at the door. He'd jump up and what call him? That was the love, man. We came to look to find out what happened to one of our Sahabas.
Right.
You understand? That's what, you know, that's the type of thing that the dog brought. And,
That's
you know,
missing today. You don't have that today.
oh no. Oh, no.
and our sisters wasn't allowed outside after Maghrib.
And they wasn't mad.
And if they got caught out there by Maghrib, we had a thing at the mosque set up that a car would come and pick them up wherever they were to get them back home safely.
Right.
We opened the doors up 24-hour mosque. One know what's going. The mosque never was closed. We didn't want to put the big speakers out there, but before then, you couldn't hear the Adhan call
Right.
in New York or Brooklyn. Man, we were some ragtag brothers, man, came out of the street and fell in love with the deen.
I mean,
Right.
And we predicated on when we said we were, you know, matter of fact, Imam Jamil was sitting to my right when he took the bay'ah. You know, when he took the bay'ah, he was sitting to my right. But anyway, the thing is, we said, you know, we'll follow, as long as it's Quran and Sunnah, we'll follow it. You understand? Long as it was Quran and the Sunnah, we follow it. And that's what we did, man. We obeyed, you know, those in command. Long as it was stayed in the guidelines of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. So that's what made us strong, man.
You reminded me of a story when I was a teenager. I remember had a girlfriend who had an aunt that was a Muslim, and the husband put his hands on the sister, and so the sister made a phone call to I guess it was on 52nd Street, made a phone call, and several brothers, you know, came over there, and they just got information from the sister, and they handled the situation. And when I looked at those brothers, I said, oh, those Malcolm Muslims. You know, and that was really impressive. I mean, they gave me dawah, and there was one brother, Brother Rashid, your cousin Abdul Hadi. You know, he was one of the brothers, and I talked to him about that years later, and he didn't remember the situation. But it's just that you never know when you're giving a person dawah, and that really, I was 17, 18 years old, and was just really impressed with the fact that this sister was able to call some men to handle somebody who was acting a fool. And they handled it, and I said, okay, that's those Malcolm Muslims.
yeah. I dare say the Dar Islam movement will go down in history as well as mystery as #1 Orthodox African American community that existed. I dare say that because at our time, there was, I think it was called the Federation of Imams, but that was a foreign organization.
Right.
It was the Muslim Student Association of the United States and Canada. That was a foreign organization.
Absolutely.
And there was developed at one point something called the Islamic Party, I think, but they weren't as large as Dar Islam. You know, I think that Dar Islam did it best. We were known as second only to Elijah Muhammad. That's the way we was known. You know what I mean? If you was black and a Muslim, then you must have been a part of Elijah Muhammad's thing or Dar Islam. You know, mashallah, alhamdulillah.
There's a whole lot of stuff. There's tons and tons and tons of stuff, that each individual brother can actually talk about. And really, if you're really going to document this, it probably needs to be done as soon as possible, simply because of the fact you still have brothers and sisters who are alive today who are a part of that. So you're not getting secondhand information, which in a few years, that's all it's going to be. Because even if a brother gets around, his memory is not going to be like it used to be. Right here, I'm listening to these conversations. There's some dates and stuff that are off, but it's nothing to have a discussion on the air about. It's just something to talk to each other about and say, this is the kind of thing that Akil and I are doing. We're putting timelines together based on physical documentation from records that have been kept with letters. And I have letters going all the way back to from Imam Yahya to us when we took over that mosque in 1969. Letters from Imam Tawfiq, letters from the brother Islamic Party, Muzaffar-Din. There's a lot of history, from people who were there. Brother Musa, Brother Abdul Hadi, all these brothers were there, and they can give you the dynamics of their experiences with the Dar at the time. And, it's about hooking up the timelines and those people who did those things. When you hear about history that these people have, they have names attached to that history. They say this was Clark Gable's move to the North Pole. And in his crew, he had so-and-so. But they didn't name the black ones, but in his crew, he had this and they had that, okay? So those are the kind of things that we need to make sure that we're going to document when it comes to these things that we're dealing with right now. It's important.
Yeah, inshallah, what we're going to do, FY, to speak to that, just to speak to the museum again, just to shout out the museum. The website for the museum is aihmuseum.org. We intend to, inshallah, as a matter of fact, this definitely spurs me. We're probably going to continue. I'm going to talk to Brother Amir. He probably going to let me do it. We're going to do a monthly. We're going to have to do something monthly on this particular thing. And then on top of that, we have something called the AIH Museum. Akil has already signed up as a researcher. And that's exactly what we want to do. Inshallah, we're going to compare timelines and compare. And we have a system set up, inshallah, where people can actually upload their documents. And actually we can reference and cross-reference in a similar way to how Sunnah was even referenced and cross-referenced. There's no reason why we shouldn't be taking our own records and lineage in the same way. So that's the plan when it comes to that, inshallah. Musa and Masood, I know y'all, I know you all had more questions or anything that y'all wanted to add, and then also Akil as well.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. So I did want to say one thing about one of the things that Imam Mutawaf mentioned about placing the posters all over. But Imam, he's been a little modest because, yeah, they did posters, but they also did billboards. So just imagine that, placing billboards, at that time, all across the country, speaking about Islam, Orthodox Islam, when others were kind of keeping Islam hidden, not wearing hijab, not wearing thobes, not in public. You know what I'm saying? These brothers was establishing it and announcing it. Alhamdulillah, I take a great deal of admiration for them. It reminded me of like the Sahaba who, when they were amongst the Quraysh, who were against Islam, but they would go out and they would shout Islam amongst the people that were against them in Islam. And the brothers in the Dar, that's what they did. It wasn't a cool thing to be a Muslim. You know what I'm saying? They had to establish respect for Islam, and that was a beautiful thing. Alhamdulillah. So I just wanted to, have people have a really good dynamic of what was going on. And, to speak to something you said earlier, Khalil, about having sisters on this discussion, I think that is a much needed aspect. And it's a couple of sisters in particular that I know that you tried to reach out to, and they know they should be on here. But alhamdulillah, inshallah, we'll get them next time and really have a really broad discussion about the sisters who helped establish Islamic schools. A lot of those early schools, and I'm not talking about just the schools that were mosques or centered around the masjid, but the ones that also that got accredited schools and had big programs and stuff. A lot of that came from sisters who were, and brothers, but sisters who were part of the Dar al-Islam. The school named after the two Shaheeds, you know, in New York, you know, things like that. That doesn't get as discussed. Another thing that, you know, we haven't really touched about, I heard about the Rod, and we discussed that, but the Jawala Scouts, that's something that's missing today on a broad scale. I know Philly got it going on, Sheikh, and Sheikh Muhammad is still there doing his thing, but across the country, something that like that is needed in terms of giving Muslim men a regard to transitioning to manhood, right? And giving them parameters and guidance to create that type of character building that we need in our communities. That's a deficiency right now, right? But the Dar had that. And the Jawala Scouts built a lot of good men. If you look at a lot of the accomplishments of some of those brothers that came through the Dar and came through the Jawala Scouts, it's great. And a lot of the sisters that came through, I think it was the Women of Muslimat or something like that. I forgot the name offhand. Y'all don't have to forgive me. But a lot of them are entrepreneurs and doing things across the country and even outside of the country. All of them have roots in the Dar al-Islam movement. So it's wide. It's way more than what an hour or a little bit of time can to try to encapsulate. But it was a great deal. I know, you know, people like to talk about the splits and all of that stuff, and that's part of the history, but it's much more dynamic in terms of its impact and the broadness and the depth of it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's my piece on it.
And I want to just interject real quick, because I see a person commenting, one of the person who's commenting. And by the way, FYI, you all have kept the attention of everybody. It's like around 50 people on Facebook. It's been the whole time. It's been an hour and a half, and I can go as long as y'all need to go. I'm good. Whoever needs to go can go, but I'm good. So, but I wanted to say really quickly, a couple of questions that were asked. One of them was, a statement. It sounds like people are content with the glory days of Islam, and the next one was, did the Dar make institutions? So I'm gonna let y'all answer the second one, but the first one is the reason why we're actually here, and the younger brothers who I've actually talked to, like Masood and Musa. And I'm gonna put Akil in that category for now. We actually,
I am a young elder.
The reason why we're here is because we know we're in a transition. And the truth is that the Dar were the first, we know the Dar to be the first Orthodox Muslims to establish institutions that were destroyed by splits and things like that. So if we already have information from people who have done it before, we have to extract that information. That's what learning from history means. So we're actually here because we actually want to make sure that we can take from the ones who did it before the best of what they did, and then learn from the mistakes so that we can establish what we need to establish, because we see it's time. We see this COVID thing here right now. We don't know who's leaving this earth soon, and we know now it's urgent. So the reason why we're actually here is to build upon, because we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a reason why lineage and history is so important within Islam, and the Prophet Muhammad SAW also emphasized it, and many of the believers emphasize it. It's to emphasize it so that we can learn from the mistakes, and that we can also continue on the good and not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So I just wanted to emphasize that, as some people are on there kind of asking or
right, and
what the reason is for why anyone want to add to that?
That is something that's very important, Khalil, because you know, right now I'm in a position where I am somewhat of an amir of a community, and we see that the community is aging. We see that we're struggling to get people of childbearing age to populate the ranks. We see that there is some question as to what the ummah in 10 years is going to look like. What's that going to consist of? The people who are the strongest workers in our community 5 years ago are now, you know, 80% of them, a lot of them in the ground, you know, in the Lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. So, you know, yes, we love and champion the brothers and sisters who laid the foundation for us to be able to even have communities and have things. But Imam Mutawaf said something earlier about when he first came into the deen and he entered a masjid, and he saw that there wasn't any ibadah being done. He saw that there wasn't any activity, that they weren't making the salats and things like that. And then they took it over. You know, they saw the opportunity to basically take over that masjid. And now when I travel and I see a lot of the communities that used to thrive and a lot of the communities that used to be vibrant and popping, and now they sit and they lunch meet for somebody. If there was a group that comes into some of these communities, you know, it's a similar situation to what Imam Mutawaf described him and his group seeing and taking over at the time. So what I can try to attribute it to, patterns, when you try to look at patterns, and we have, recurring themes like, we don't have the history together. This is a forgotten thing, or people don't know. Whereas other movements documented and they championed education and having people who could go out, become historians, document their things. And we want to be able to say, okay, where did we go right? What is the stuff that we did right? 5 salats a day established, brotherhood, sutra, being strong, sticking to the Quran and Sunnah, right? But then we have to also look at, okay, so what can we do better going forward? And to me, it looks like a lot of the sisters, a lot of the young women, a lot of the girls, my contemporaries, right, who grew up in our communities were encouraged or allowed or, told to go to college and go get a secular education. Whereas for us, a lot of us, it was Quran and Sunnah is all you need. Allah and His Rasul is going to take care of it. I mentioned before that, my father is in the Tablighi Jamaat. So, we had limited means, but, he was still leaving for a week, 2 weeks, a month at a time. And with the idea that, the interpretation that Allah and His Rasul, Allah is going to provide for my family as I'm leaving behind, right? But you don't think about how does that impact the sisters we leave behind? How does that impact the children that we leave behind, right? And when we see the young boys grow up and they end up in a cycle of prison and incarceration that come from these communities and succumb to the temptations of the street, how do we prevent that, right? And how do we, highlight and create a love for Quran and Sunnah, while also telling somebody to go ahead and get an education in this world so that they can sustain and be providers, right? And not say Allah is going to provide for you through me, right? And not just Allah is going to provide somehow, some way. You say Bismillah and that's it. So the plague of poverty, we see it is sweeping the country in a lot of these neighborhoods that used to thrive. So I want to hear, especially from Imam Nadim, because I know you personally. I know that you raised, 4 daughters, highly educated. Salah is an outstanding young man, and you've seen this play out in the West End community in Atlanta, where your family is an anomaly in that regard. So what advice can you give to somebody like myself who sits in a position, to try to make decisions for not only my family, but for a community at large, about what things we definitely can build on and what things that we need to improve as far as being productive in this society?
Yes, I think, thank you. I think a lot of, we came into Islam expecting Islam to solve everything, but we also came into Islam with a lot of our post-slave dysfunctions. And so we had to use Islam as a healing for the trauma of slavery. And so first of all, we had to recognize that we had that trauma and all of the things that were going on. I mean, many of us came through gang life, drug activities and all of that. And so we adopted a level of religiosity and did not attain a high level of spirituality. And so I think that's one of the things that I would suggest, that we have to have, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that you follow the middle course. That we have to balance our deen with, dealing with the overall society, because we live in a pluralistic society. We came in wanting to change the world, that we're going to establish Islam in the land. And when the geographical Islam did not manifest itself, then you know, things started to splinter out and people moved on to more general communities. And so, you know, even for myself, as the Prophet Musa alayhi salam said, to turn your houses into places of worship. So, you know, we basically made the necessary sacrifices so that our children could basically have a balance of the world and a balance of Islam, to be Muslim in the world, as opposed to, I know, we live near the AU Center, and every year in the early days, you know, people would bring their children to Clark or Morehouse or Spelman, and they would be people with kufis and kimars on, coming in as freshmen and leaving out of those institutions, you know, doing some other things, because a lot of times as parents, we might put too much pressure on the children to be Muslim, but not have that balanced approach to Islam. And then as soon as the children would get away from their environment, then they would wild out for the most part. And so we have to learn how to basically introduce our children to the world, the things that's halal, the things that are lawful, and also recognize, have them to discern, you know, who they are in this world. They are Muslim first, human beings first. And so as human beings, we are going to be tempted towards things, but we're Muslim second, you know, for the most part, even though, you know, we're born Muslim, born inclined to be Muslim, but we are susceptible to all of the ills of the overall society. And we have to inoculate our children to the ills of the society by teaching them, you know, to what to look out for, the minefields in the overall society. And my Zoja and I, my wife and I, we tried to do that. You know, we came into Islam again in our 20s. And so we were at the age where we were supposed to be settling down anyway, you know, but a lot of, you know, youth grew up in Islam. And so the parents who came into Islam later did not give that inoculation, you know, to what to look out for. And so kids will go out and try to just taste some of the world, taste some of the dunya, you know. So I think it's important, specifically for those of you who have younger families, those of you who are starting families, to, again, if you're going to be here, you know, you're going to have to basically teach them the good and the bad of the society, and not just that everything is haram and these people are kufr, our relatives are kufr and everything. And we have to recognize that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had all people around him, Christians, Jews, and you know, pagans. You know, he lived in a pluralistic society, very similar to the society that we're living in. And so I think one of the lessons I would encourage, to make sure that your children know, have a balanced approach to this society, so that, you know, it's not something that's brand new to them when they're independent, inshallah. I hope I answered the question.
If I may add to that, Imam.
No.
I raised 4 boys,
Alhamdulillah, and
all of them are in the mosque. Okay, and their children are. All right. My grandson, one of my grandsons goes down with one of my sons and feeds the homeless, and he's still in elementary school. And he's not the only one. There's a bunch of them like that. When it came to raising my kid, we didn't put our kids in an Islamic school, because really they weren't qualified. You know, it was just going to be about, you know, whatever that was going to be, but that didn't happen. We had our kids in regular school, and I was in their life like glue. Okay. I always made comparisons between them and the people that they may start looking up to the point where even one time, one of my kids, along with Sheikh Tawfiq's kids, asked him, Abu, are Negroes human beings? Okay. Because what you have to do, what I did, what worked for me, is I didn't tie them up. They wanted to go someplace. We just want to know where you're going. And then when they came home, you know, I would question them and say, so what happened? Well, this happened. I said, you know, they got stains in their clothes, don't you? You know, they're filthy. You know, you want to be like that? You know, I mean, that was my approach, and it worked. Okay, none of my kids went out there like that. Okay, and they're all in the mosque, you know, and their kids are. Okay, and the whole approach, the thing that I got from the Dar Islam movement was the fact that you're building families from one generation to the next generation, and you have to be able to figure out how you're going to navigate those problems that are going to come up naturally. And if you make your children feel that they are better than somebody else, that's unfortunate that you have to do that, because the society is trying to make them feel that they're less than somebody in this society. So in order to buoy that up, my kids always felt they were better than anybody else. Okay. And, you know, so you couldn't come to them and say, well, you know, you're this and you're that. And they were proud to do whatever it was they were doing. And we didn't make them wear kufis and thobes and all that. They went and did. Some of my kids even got into gangs, but they let them. You understand? Because of the fact they weren't followers. So I think it's really important, especially for the men, to spend a lot of time with their daughters and their sons, making a distinction. All of the soft peddling, well, you know, we're all the same. No, we're not all the same. Who told you that? You understand? That's not true. You're better than him. You know why? Because he has urine in his clothes and dung in his pants, and he eats pig. That's Reverend Hogmaw's son. You understand? You got to make them feel that they're better than somebody else, so that they don't ever have to turn to somebody else's way of life to feel that they're equal. That worked for me. I don't know how it worked for anybody else, but I'm just saying that worked for me with mine. And mine are all in the mouth.
Musa, smiling, man. What's up?
Well, Assalamu alaikum. Relative to that whole kind of conversation, and I don't like to use that big I thing. However, I think that from my viewpoint, that a lot of the problem, a lot of the circumstance that we face, especially now, is because I think we suffer from what I call American consciousness. And that is this, that alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed Islam to be as it is. So we get this idea in our brains, number one, we're not Arab. So because we're not Arab, we're Americans, we live in America. And because we live in America, and America has freedom of religion, we choose Islam for our religion. However, religion in America has nothing to do necessarily with how I make my money, what kind of clothes I wear, what kind of food I eat, or anything of that nature. Religion in America only calls for me to go to my Sabbath and for me to believe as I believe. So I believe there's no God but Allah and Jesus is not the Son of God, la-di-da. And I go to the mosque on Friday. My next door neighbor goes to church on Sunday. However, we both go to the Eagles game on Monday. We both go to the club on Saturday. You understand what I mean? So, you know, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, everything's cool with me and my religion. And I think that that kind of consciousness kind of hurts us, because the people that come along under that kind of a thought, like now, for instance, I have grandchildren. I have a 13-year-old grandchild, right? He's 13 years old. And this boy does nothing but hit a game of basketball on his computer, and he plays basketball all day long. And he just got inducted into a number one team in Delaware. That's a nationwide team that you have to be like of the top 10 to get into. But he's like that. But the boy might not know 10 surahs. You know what I mean? You know, mashallah. On the other hand, my granddaughter, his sister, she recently got married, but she's 29 years old. And alhamdulillah, Muslim woman. She went through college. She has a master's. She's had good jobs, you know, she covers, and she just got married. And she married a man who happened to be Hafif, born in Islam himself, practicing in Islam, studied in Saudi for like 10 years, you know. So I think that this consciousness that we work with kind of helps, hurts a little bit, you know, because Shaitan uses the most, the weakest thing we got going is what Shaitan uses, you know what I mean? He uses that against us. So if my boy's cool, he's cool with me, you know what I mean? Oh, she's pretty, she's fine, and she's so fine, she don't think that Jesus is God's son, so I'm gonna marry her. You know what I mean? Without realizing that Allah and the Quran and Muhammad got everything that you need to live as a human being already laid out for you. All you got to do is follow the guidance. You know what I mean? If you don't follow the guidance, we hear it every week. Those whom Allah guides, can't nobody misguide. But those whom Allah allows to be in error, then there is no guidance for them. So inshallah, I think that there are often things to be done, and I don't know how. I offered this one time. You know, we used to have the mosque open 24 hours a day. So I said to the brother in charge of security, I said, you know what? If you could get 3 men that dedicated 8 hours every day, like you do a job, you go to a job and you go to your job every day, except the 2 days you off, whatever it is, and you go to your job 8 hours. If you could get 3 men to dedicate 8 hours, you could keep the mosque open 24 hours. If you know your gig is sitting on the desk from 12 to 8, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and the other one is there from 8 to 4, the other one from 4 to 12, you could keep the mosque open for 24 hours. You know what the response was? Oh, these brothers want to get paid. Their brothers, they can't do it, Bismillah. You know, they got to have falus, man. You know what I mean? They got young families and stuff like that, you know, but they go to work 8 hours a day, 15 hours a day, you know. So I think this American consciousness kind of like hinders a little bit of the community as a whole. Leaping forward as we can, you know, by Allah's permission, because you can't do no more than what Allah got you doing anyway. You know, what's for you don't miss you. You know what I mean? And if you get it, you're supposed to have it.
Assalamu alaikum.
All right.
Hello?
You're right. Hello.
Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, you know, not don't go into a long thing, but can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, one of the things, one of the biggest mistakes that we make as indigenous people in this country and Muslims, we have not, we talk a lot, but we have not established no places where your grandkids can say, hey, my grandfather helped build that. No institutions, man. I heard a brother say, you know, they was having problems, and the brother said, you know, the children wouldn't come to the mosque, so we had to bring the mosque to the kids. And when I looked at it, they had nice, in their mosque, they had big gymnasium, weights, this with the kids, and you know, that helps, man. And if you couldn't, you know, in the classes that they gave, within that structure, if you didn't participate, you couldn't go there and play ball in their big gym, play with their weights, or do anything. So we hadn't established as a people, man, when I say as a people, as an Amriki people, we have not established the institutions for our kids. That's one of the big mistakes that happened in the 60s all the way up to the 80s to the 90s. We talk and talk, but we haven't that established. We cannot come together as a people. We cannot come together, man. You know, cannot. If you throw a nickel in the whatcom, if you go for a fundraiser, and they fundraising, you looking to see who's throwing this. You know, I don't did that, man. I don't know what they don't do with this money. You know, that type of stuff, man. We need to establish so our kids can be strong, man. And, you know, they can be just as free as any other kids out there and maintain their deen. But we have not established no institutions for them that I know of all over the land. Not no real good institutions for our kids growing up into Islam. We are dying off breed right now, all of us on the phone. So we got to leave some legacy. You know, my father always said, and he wasn't Muslim, my father always said, you know, when a white man died, He leaves his kids gold, money. He said, when a black man dies, his kid signs. Don't go under that ladder. Don't let that black cat cross your path. And all the rest, all of that goes into that, man. But in general, we have not established nothing for the kids, man. That's all across the land. All across the land. Haven't done nothing. Not really. We sit and talk, but as a people, you imagine if we came together, all of us, and put our money in that bucket and say, man, we ain't differentiate. And this guy over here, we're here to do a solid job. And that's to boost the morale of our kids in this land. But we haven't done that.
What's up?
So, yeah. I am a child of the Dar al-Islam movement. My name is Musa Abdul Rahman. My father, Ali Abdul Rahman, helped to establish.
Your father, what's his name?
Ali Abdul Rahman, Big Ali. He helped to establish Masjid al-Safat, which is now under the
Lost your audio.
Yeah.
Okay.
You there? All right, we're back. Okay.
So, Masjid al-Safat, which is under the leadership of Imam Taifa Abdullah, was one of the masjids under the Dar al-Islam movement. And as a child of the movement, definitely, we can look back at some of the shortcomings that that may have been presented now that we have the benefit of hindsight. But from my perspective, and it's not just simply to, as many people in my generation, see it as, we're just trying to relive the golden days or hear people talk about the golden days. But there's a level of accountability that existed back then. There was a level of responsibility and a commitment to service that existed. And alhamdulillah, that's what was drilled and ingrained into me as a Jawala. And alhamdulillah, that's what I try to drill into my own children. But with that being said, I think that as a people, as we're discussing the legacy of the movement, as a people, we have to recognize that, and even those individuals who are still living, who actually lived through it, it was a phenomenal thing. It was a really phenomenal thing that was able to be done, and it served its purpose, for that time period, and it served to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manifested for it to do. So we can't necessarily beat ourselves up as a people now that we are, even by Sheikh Musa's estimation, he came into the Dar, accepted Islam at 19. Imam al-Din, same thing, at 19. Imam Mutawa, same thing, 19. Imam al-Amin Abdul Latif, same thing, 19. So all of these guys and women, they are coming into Islam in their early and late teenage years. And now here we are 40, 50 years later. And we're, for lack of a better word, really complaining that we don't have, institutions and things like that. Really, I smile and add that because what other people in history held themselves to such a high standard? What other people, held themselves to such a high standard that they were going to establish the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and leave a legacy of the deen, except for the generation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nobody, like I said, we're talking about 50 years, in some cases 60 years in. So while I understand, the snap, desire to be critical of what was done back then and what hasn't been done up to now, I think that it would serve us better as a people, as a Muslim people, to be able to look at that example and understand it for the snapshot in time that it was, and then use it to propel us forward. So many of the institutions that don't exist now, you know, such as, you know, elderly homes, hospitals, libraries, and things of that nature. I mean, alhamdulillah, we're at a point now where you all have done much of the heavy lifting in terms of laying that foundation. Now, Sheikh Abdul Hadi, you know, your granddaughter and Imam Mutawaf, your son and your grandsons, all of us that are now second and third generation Muslims, we have the responsibility now of building on that foundation that you all have left.
I mean,
and are still paving in a way.
I mean,
because now we get to one of the crux of the item that we were talking about here is that we're talking about transition now. So now, as we're talking about this thing of transition, because the people have not gone through this, you all were the first to do it. Imam Mutawaf, you know, by his own testimony today, he said that, you know, they came in and they found that the masjid wasn't being used, and so they took it over. And so now we find the same thing, you know, like Brother Masood just said. You know, we find the same thing. Our masjids are in the same condition. They're not being used effectively to service. So how do we now use that example to propel ourselves forward? It's not a matter of, you know, just wanting to glorify the old days, you know, but alhamdulillah, as you just heard Sheikh Musa saying, the reality is that, you know, what he's essentially saying is that he hurt that we didn't, that their generation didn't go far enough. And again, I can as a second generation Muslim, I can only, you know, applaud that sentence. You know, so inshallah, you know, one question that I would like for Sheikh Abdul Hadi, as well as Imam Mutawaf, Imam to speak about is legacy in terms of how do we, what would be your advice for this third generation to build on that foundation that you're leaving?
All politics are local. And I think when you build strong local communities, that's something that you have a foundation for. And some of the institutions that we talked about, that some of those institutions were never abandoned. Okay, the institution of feeding the poor, that's not a new situation. That was taking place back in 68, 69. Okay, visiting, establishing places of rehabilitation where you rehabilitate people who were basically abandoned by the society. Those are institutions that still exist. Also, with the internet and with the new technology, what happens is it kind of expands and opens up the world to brothers like yourself, second generation brothers, who can reach outside of their communities to other people who have things in common with them and build frameworks from there. You're not no longer like we were, kind of like we used to have to travel 8 hours to get to New York, 7 hours to get to Philadelphia. You can do it in the blink of an eye, okay? And you can network with brothers who think like you. And then you can develop these things. You guys know what it is that's necessary. You know, I mean, you know, you're the new energy. You know, you guys got the energy, you know, the technology, and just take advantage of it. And you don't have to stay in your own locale looking for somebody. But if you do have a situation, build a strong local community. And the masjid is part of that foundation. The masjid is essential. When the Prophet ﷺ went somewhere, the first thing he did when he got to Medina was establish the masjid. Okay, you can't get around that idea of the masjid. If it's 5 people that you got that come to the masjid on a regular basis, you know, that's 5 people that, you know, can do things for the masjid and spread out from there. It doesn't have to be a big, huge place. Masjid Safat has been around for decades. For decades. I remember their first imam was Mustafa Abdul Rahman. He was the imam before Taifa. And when Taifa went overseas, your Abu was the imam and took over for all those years. So that has been sustained, man. You know, the masjid, like even with the Fukra movement, there are a lot of brothers who grew up in the Dar Islam movement who became with the Fukra, like Musa was saying. But those brothers, you understand, still have this intact, the focus of a masjid and a community. And that's what it's about. You have to develop the community. You don't need a big, huge community, you know, because the more people, the more problems, you know, but you can establish, just get 5 people that think like you understand, who maybe have different backgrounds or different skills and abilities, and establish something with them. And then if they know 2 people, each one of you know 2 people, you reach out for them to develop whatever you think is, whatever makes sense to you. Just develop that, okay? And then, you know, people get used to it. And then, because you got a lot of people that are looking for something, okay? And it's not like we have been left alone to undermine ourselves. We have been undermined by the media. We have been undermined and maligned by everything in this country. And then when they bring the immigrants in, they're put there and told them, y'all know, y'all be in charge of the niggas, because we're not gonna never let them be in charge of nothing. You know, part of your giving up part of your soul, you understand, to come here is to make sure you don't have no connection with them and help them do nothing. You understand? You're their boss. You're a surrogate white man for them. And you got a lot of young people who do that, but those people who grew up in the dark, you have that foundation, you know that's not true. And you have other people who are searching for something, try to contact with them on their level. You got a guy, he might be a good mathematician. You got another guy, he may be a good entrepreneur. Hook into him on a level which you could communicate. And you can expand from there. You know, you guys know what, you know, guys know what's needed. You know, you are in this society, you know what it is. To me, what is amazing, some of the people who grew up in these monsters, and I know you have to have encountered them, I can tell the way you're talking. These people are completely disconnected from any understanding about community. And I mean, you can't even reach them. You can't even reach them. So it's important, I think, to establish, if you get 5 people, just work with that, brother, you know, and build something from there. And you got the internet, you got people everywhere who are trying to do something. Connect with them. That's my advice.
Assalamu alaikum. If I might say, I think Imam Tawfiq hit it right there. The focal point for Dar Islam was, first thing you had to do is have a mosque, and it had to be open 24 hours a day, because worship of Allah is what's going to get anything done. If you want to have schools, you got to be worshiping Allah, whatever it is. As I said, I think that somehow, through the years, somehow this concept of almost like it's not my fault, man, kind of attitude, you know, makes it so that the Muslim doesn't have the what do you call it, the oomph, you know, to do Islam. You know, he can push a button and get 1,000 hadiths, and he can get fatwas from all over the world by just pushing a button. You know what I mean? Unlike when you have to, like, literally thumb to a book, you know what I mean, and get another book and look up a word that you didn't understand to try to do something that you know has to be done. So inshallah, starting, you got to turn to worship. And what I mean by that is you got to go to the masjid, you got to open up the masjid, and you got to frequent the masjid, and you got to establish, not just make, you got to establish a prayer level going. With that kind of stuff comes the aid and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it gives you a better understanding of how you're supposed to do what you have to do. The thing about being alive, and Mutab can testify to it as I can, the thing about being alive is you can't look forward and say, this is what we're going to do. Can't do that. But you can look back and say, oh, okay, now we did that, so now let's switch it around and do it like this. You know, you can do that. So we can look back and say, oh, okay, what we did at that juncture, what we have to do is, if that worked then, it'll work now. If it worked then, it'll work now. We say the same Fatiha that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said when it was first revealed to him. We say the same Fatiha. So a lot of times, and specifically nowadays, now a time, is the time for the return to what some of the folks used to say, my old time religion. You know what I mean? To turn to